everyone. Welcome to the MBA Story Spotlight, the place where you're going to learn everything you need to know about differentiating yourself in the MBA admissions race. I see that the number of participants is going up, so let's give people a moment to assemble. In the meantime, what I want you to know is that both the chat and the Q&A are enabled. So you can comment, you can ask questions, but I will save most of the questions until the end. We're going to have ample time for Q&A. But in the meantime, I want you to hit the chat and tell me, where are you joining from today? So let me see some places, countries, cities. All righty, let's see. Colorado, Poland, India, Philadelphia. Excellent, excellent, excellent. Djibouti, Africa, Dallas, California. Friends, you're from all over the place. And in case you're wondering, today I am joining you from New York City, where it's a little smoky outside. You've probably heard that the fires up in Canada are making everything a little crazy here. But anyhow, here's what we're going to do today, right? I want you to raise your hand if, are you paying attention? I want you to raise your hand if you're with me today because you want to level up your MBA admissions game and you are over fluffy strategies that don't give you actionable insights and you are ready for tangible advice that actually helps you stand out in the MBA admissions race by building an outstanding application. Excellent, excellent, excellent. I love seeing the raised hands because this is exactly what we're going to do today. We're going to cover some really important ground. You'll see examples of good MBA stories and examples of not so good MBA stories. And even more importantly, towards the second half of our presentation, we will jump into action and we're going to cover some very specific ways in which you can start uncovering and creating your own MBA story. So I'll give you tools you can use literally today and make progress on your MBA application. Now, let's make the most out of our time together. So turn off that cell phone, close all these multiple windows that I know you have open, close your door if you're in the office, be present so that together we can make the most of this opportunity. And let's jump straight into action. I want to show you something because I know that you love seeing examples of what other candidates do. So I want to show you an excerpt from a Stanford MBA essay. Let's read it together. Here's what it says. I grew up having a very idealistic view of what I want to do in life. I want to have a substantial positive impact on the world. Now, I want to ask you, does this paragraph grab your attention? You know that Stanford cares tremendously about impact. So do you feel that this candidate hit the mark? Go in the chat and tell me, yes or not. What do you think? Do you think that this is the premise of a really strong essay? Someone is saying nope, no. You guys are good. It is true. If you said that this is not a very strong essay, you are absolutely right. But the most important part is, why is this not a convincing way to demonstrate what matters most to you? And here's the thing. The problem with this approach is that when we make a statement about ourselves, it's rarely convincing. Or as Margaret Thatcher, a former British Prime Minister, very masterfully portrayed by Gillian Anderson, for those of you fans of The Crown, the way she put it is, being powerful is like being a lady. If you have to tell people you are, you aren't. Statements are flat. Statements are boring. And the worst part of all is statements are forgettable. And the last thing you want to happen when your admission file is being reviewed is to be forgettable. But how do you get out of the statement trap? If the AdCom is asking what matters most to you, then why doesn't a direct answer work? After all, it does answer the question, right? The problem is that the AdCom wants to see how your idealistic worldview was formed, what it actually means to have an impact. How do you plan on having this impact on the world? What have you already done? You've probably seen that outcomes are famous for using your past actions as a predictor of your future ones, of your future success. So the MBA outcome wants proof and evidence. They're not satisfied with statements. And what it actually means is the MBA outcome wants to hear your story. They want to know what happened. They want to know how it happened. They want to know what is it that you did to make it happen. And they want to know why you did what you did. Usually when I start talking about this, candidates continue to feel unsure what this story about yourself that you're going to have to tell to the MBA outcome is going to be. And very often I know that you're afraid that your application is not going to stand out, or even worse, you are afraid that you will miss the mark and not get into your dream school. But whatever your fear is, you're in the right place today, because I can pull the curtain and I can teach you how to embark on creating your MBA story with inspiration and confidence. But at this point, you might be asking yourselves, like, wait a second, who is this Petia Whitmore and how does she claim to be an expert on this topic? Where do her insights come from? So you would be absolutely right to ask. So let me introduce myself. I have been part of MBA admissions for the last 15 years. I spent 8 years at the Graduate School of Business at Babson College, and most of that time was spent directing the efforts of the MBA admissions team, presiding over the AdCom, and being the ultimate decision maker on MBA application stories, right? And applications. From there, I moved to the Education Advisory Board, EAB, which is a company in the portfolio of Vista Equity Partners. And if you do not know Vista, I am actually fairly certain that you know the founder of Vista, Robert Smith, who in 2019, in the middle of his commencement speech at Morehouse College, famously paused and promised all the graduating students and their families in the audience to eliminate their student debt. So he paid something like $34 million to cover the debt, the student loans of everyone who was graduating and their parents. So this is what I used to work for and help create enrollment marketing strategies for colleges and universities. And from there, just before I launched my MBA admissions consulting firm, my MBA Path, I spent 2 years at the Graduate Management Admission Council, the same organization that administers the GMAT exam, and I managed one of their subsidiaries, the MBA Tour. Nowadays, I frequently write for various publications. If you Google me, you'll see quotes in the Wall Street Journal, in Business Because, but that's not the most important part. I'm mentioning all of this because I want you to know where my insights come from. I want you to know how I happen to be able to claim to be an authority on this whole MBA story concept. Equally importantly, actually even more importantly, who I am is I'm an MBA admissions enthusiast. I firmly believe that the MBA is a transformational journey for everyone. And I'm on a mission to create more MBA success stories. And this is why I'm here today in front of you. I want to help you feel more confident in how you will build your own MBA story that will pave the way to you being admitted to your dream MBA program. Because this example of an essay that doesn't really catch the attention, that doesn't really answer the question in a powerful and compelling way, this doesn't have to be you. It doesn't have to happen to you. You don't have to be the person who gets moved to the pile of candidates who fail to differentiate themselves. Instead, I want you to imagine that the MBA outcome is reading your file. And when they read your story, they say, we must meet this person. And then they move your file to the interview invites. This is where we're going today. Now, how are you going to get there? First, we're going to talk about evaluation versus selection. This is a fundamental principle of MBA admission that I want you to know about. From there, we're going to cover why the MBA story is actually so critical, right? Because it's important to know. After that, I am going to dispel one of your worst fears, the fact that sometimes you think that you have to be exceptional in order to be unique. You don't have to be extraordinary in order to be unique, and you'll see some proof and evidence of why I'm making this claim. Finally, we're going to work on how you can find the nuggets for your own MBA story. And as promised, we're also going to have time for Q&A. Great, wonderful. So let's begin. And let's level set here for a moment. If I told you that more than half of all Stanford GSB candidates are actually qualified for admission, would that be true or not? Jump in the chat and give me a yes or no. Is it true that more than half of all Stanford GSB candidates are qualified for admission? Let's see what you're saying. Yes, yes, and yes. You guys are a very well-educated bunch, because the fact is, it is absolutely true. It happens to be. There's a powerful process of self-selection that ensures that a very large number of candidates to the very top schools actually have the statistics, the test scores, the GPA, the work experience, the qualifications that meet the evaluation criteria. Now, if this is the case, then how does it happen that only 7% of the candidates actually get admitted? You might say, well, there's a capacity constraint. There are only so many seats in the class, and you will be right, that's true. But most importantly, if so many candidates qualify and only 7% get admitted, then how the heck does this process actually work? Well, within the very huge number of MBA applications who qualify, you need to be someone who they want to invite to the class, right? So evaluation determines who is admissible. Selection, on the other hand, determines who is desirable. And this is exactly why the MBA story is so important. So I want you to pause here, and I want you to really take this in. Evaluation versus selection is the fundamental principle of MBA admission. And if there is a magic formula to MBA admission to the most selective schools, this is part of it. If you understand this concept, and if you approach your MBA application with it in mind, you will already be ahead of your competition. Now, let's talk a little bit more about what makes the MBA story so critical. Stories have a unique way of engaging and connecting people. Stories evoke emotions. They engage the audience, the MBA outcome reviewers, the evaluators on a deeper level. MBA admission is a very human business. The MBA admissions process is a human-to-human connection. If you tell the MBA outcome a story, you allow them to relate to your experiences, to your struggles, to your triumphs, to your growth. And when emotions are involved, people are more likely to remember and internalize the message, right? Stories paint a memorable picture. I'm sure that you all have heard the expression, a picture is worth 1,000 words. But the thing is, there isn't a lot of room for pictures in the MBA admissions process. But the parts of your MBA application do paint a picture of you, of your lived experiences. And in that evaluation versus selection process, in order to select you, the MBA outcome needs to see you. And the best way for this to happen is for you to tell them a story. There's a quote that I absolutely love. It's by someone who is a scholar of literature and evolution. And he famously said, we as species are addicted to story. Even when the body goes to sleep, the mind stays up all night telling itself stories. Think about this for a second. Isn't it powerful? And if you need even more convincing that stories are really important, then let me ask you this. What is the famous Harvard Business School case method, if not a story, right? Each case is a story about people in business, what they faced, what they did, how they did it, and how it turned out. So think about this. If Harvard Business School believes that describing a situation with a protagonist, a cast, twists and turns is the best way to teach business leaders, do you need any more convincing that your MBA story is the key to standing out in the MBA admissions race? And if you need any more evidence, let's consider what Stanford tells you their evaluation criteria are, right? This comes straight from their website. And they tell you, we base our evaluation on your whole application, and we take into account factors such as your background, experiences, perspectives, aspirations, values, and accomplishments. And what are these things collectively, if not your story, the story of who you are and how you became the person today, right? The one seeking admission. Now, let me show you one more example. That's a very different essay. This one answers the famous UC Berkeley Haas question. What makes you feel alive when doing it and why? So let's read it together. I come alive when the vibrant scent of cumin permeates the air. Beyond following my rebellious streak, defying culinary norms allows me to express myself in inventive, edible forms. It's quite different, isn't it? Right? You can immediately imagine this scene and you want to keep reading because you're intrigued. You're like, what on earth does cooking have to do with a rebellious streak? And why is this what makes this person most alive? So remember, stories always will trump statements. Stories are what make everything real, and stories are what the MBA outcome will remember. So as you continue with your MBA application, remember the first example and then consider the second one. Now let's talk a little bit about one of the most challenging parts of the MBA aspirant's mindset. And it's that whole notion of, but I don't have anything extraordinary in my story to tell you. So there's a reason why I showed you a cooking example of all things, right? Is there anything exceptional about cooking? Not really. So many of us do it on a daily basis, some with more success than others, but we still try it. That's a different story. So here's what I want you to remember as you work through your MBA application. You may think that your story is nothing special, not something that others would care about, not original. All of this is not true. You don't need a story of heroic achievement. You don't need a story about having saved a person from a burning building. In fact, I can tell you that some of these heroic stories, some of these melodramatic narratives, if they're not relevant to what you're answering in your MBA application, that they can actually backfire, right? It's a mistake candidates very often make. So a simple but authentic and meaningful story can be extremely successful. Any AdCom, even at the very top schools, will tell you that you will be surprised how some of the things that you do on an everyday basis can be some of the most fascinating things to the AdCom. Things such as, how do you operate on a team? How do you interact? How do you make decisions, right? So let's take a look at one more example. A couple of years ago, I worked with a fantastic candidate who was offered admission. Let's see if I'm going to remember all the schools. He got admitted to Kellogg, Yale, Tuck, Berkeley Haas. And this short excerpt is from one of his key essays. It was one of his strongest leadership examples. And he talked about how welcoming summer interns to EY is one of his favorite times of year, and how that summer was even more special because he volunteered to lead a small team of interns as an ambassador. Now, does being an internship program ambassador strike you as something completely extraordinary? No, but it didn't have to be to capture the attention of the MBA outcome. As simple as this accomplishment was, spanning just one summer, just a few months, by telling a story about that summer, about the journey of those 6 interns, it was deemed worthy of demonstrating the leadership and teamwork qualities that schools are looking for. And here, let me tell you a little bit of behind the scenes story about this. So when this essay first started to take shape, it was a little bit bland. So what I did is push the candidate to share details and all the nuances. I pushed him to dig into his memory of exactly what happened this summer, to name those interns, to talk about their personalities, to talk about their personal journey. And those details about how things happened were way more important than the what happened. The what was, I was a student intern ambassador. The how it happened is what made all the difference. So remember where we started. What is important is that the stories are true to your core. It's important that they're relevant, related to both the essay question and to the message that you want to send to the MBA outcome. And finally, it's critical that they help connect the dots to show how you have the qualities that schools are looking for, how you will fit into the community at your dream school, and what contributions you will make. Now, as you listen to all of this, I've been speaking for, let's see, about 21 minutes now. Are any light bulbs going off as you hear these examples? Are you starting to know what your story might be or not? Give me a comment. Let me know. Are you getting ideas about what your story might end up being? Definitely helpful. Starting to come through. Absolutely love seeing this. I know that it's very hard to find your story. I know that it's not something that happens in a vacuum. So let's talk about how to make this process even more fruitful and even more effective, right? Let's talk about where do these stories, the nuggets for these stories can come from. So let's talk about what goes into a great MBA story. The first thing I'm going to say is randomness is not your friend. Many candidates approach this process, especially when it comes to the essays, and especially the essays that are, I kind of call them the philosophical questions. What matters most to you and why? What makes you feel alive, right? They're searching for this like aha moment. Oh, that's the story I'm going to talk about. So, or even worse, they get advice from friends who used a certain kind of narrative and got in, and they think that this is the type of story I need to come up with. And then they try to force fit a story like this into some mold that they think that the MBA outcome is looking for. Neither of these approaches is a really good one. So what should you do instead? The first thing I'm going to suggest is consider a self-assessment test. Some of the good ones, some of the most contemporary ones can bring out your qualities and attributes that you can then find stories to illustrate with. And I'll show you the one that is my absolute favorite right now. It's called Principles U. It's entirely free. I have no affiliation with it. It's just that it's a phenomenal tool that I use with all my candidates in my one-on-one practice. It was created by Ray Dalio, the formidable founder of the hedge fund Bridgewater Associates, and then Professor Adam Grant from the Wharton School of Business. And it helps you understand deeply how you prefer to think, engage, and apply yourself across 17 core dimensions of your personality. So let me tell you a little bit about, that's just one teeny tiny screenshot of what you're going to get if you do this. So you're going to see kind of like what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are, and it's going to give you great verbiage. This is particularly useful for those of you who are applying to schools that actually ask you about your strengths and weaknesses. This is incredibly useful for your MBA interview where you are going to be asked about your strengths and weaknesses, because think about this. I mean, you can talk about how you're being deliberative, how you're using a systematic approach, and then you can use anecdotes, right? So you get verbiage from here, and then you find the anecdotes to illustrate these qualities with examples and help build a story. Now, where else do we search for stories? Here's what I can tell you from my experience, having worked with and supported so many candidates who have had great success at even the very top, the most selective schools. Every great MBA story starts with asking yourself questions, deep questions, hard questions, sometimes even uncomfortable questions. So here's what I'm going to show you. I have a framework that I've developed. It's called the 7 key questions. And it helps bring out the most pivotal moments from your life story and your career story. Let's run through them very quickly. The first one is, when in life have you been the saddest and the most joyful? There's actually a famous example, it's a real example, of a Harvard Business School essay about one admit who wrote about the 4 times she cried at work. And it was a very humble, very human story about woes and joy. So there's a lesson for you in her success story. So ask yourself this question. The second question is, who shaped you? Way too often, as candidates start to think about their application, their MBA brand, their MBA story, they mostly think about themselves. But the people who made you who you are or influenced you may be a really critical part of your MBA application story. So think about that as well. And here's what I'm going to do. I'm actually going to drop a link to this framework in the chat so you can download it. There's actually way more in that link than this, but you don't have to remember what these questions are. You can actually download the framework. The next question is, how does the story end? And if I have to tell you the background story of this particular question, I have a mentor, someone really important in my life and career. He is a Harvard MBA. He is a former managing partner from Bain, and he's been a CEO twice as well. And in one moment of my life, when I was questioning what my next step is going to be, we were sitting, having a cup of coffee, and I still remember him saying, "Have you thought about writing your own obituary?" I'm like, wait, what? Writing my own obituary? Apparently, it was an exercise that the MBBs, right, the McKinsey's, Bain's, BCGs do. And it has to do with actually trying to figure out what you want to be your legacy, right? So it's a really great question. I've changed a little bit because I felt like write your own obituary is a little morbid. So how does the story end? What do you want to have accomplished? Let's keep going because we're running out of time a little bit. I want to make sure that we get to questions, but I'm going to very quickly run through these. What books have you read more than once? There's a powerful insight about something that inspires you and that you go back to time and again. What is your biggest regret? What is your biggest hope? I'm ready to bet that both of these questions actually have a lot to do with the reason you are pursuing an MBA. Now, if there's one thing I want you to take away from today, it's the fact that the MBA application is an exercise in strategic communications. You need to be very intentional in your message design. You need the correct platform. Some of your messages are going to belong in your resume. Some of your messages are going to go into your essays, others in your interview. And you need to understand your audience. You need to be very clear about the desired impact and the stories that create that impact. And by desired impact, what I mean is, who do you want the MBA outcome to see when they review and look at all of your application materials, right? But sometimes, even with all this guidance, candidates need a little bit more, right? So what if you're still stuck? You've seen this presentation, you've gone through the questions. What if you're still stuck? What if you are writing your essays and you're not really sure if you start gold or not? What if you're uncertain? Obviously, as an MBA admissions consultant, I work with candidates such as you. And when I launched my MBA path, I made a bet. I made a bet that there are plenty of very smart, very talented, very driven candidates who need just a little bit of help in the MBA admission process. So I very heavily emphasize hourly work. So the ability to get a gut check, to get an inspiration, sort of MBA story gut check, and be able to do it without making a tremendous investment. And then the other thing that I have bet on is that there is a place, the MBA process itself, the MBA education process is a team sport. So why shouldn't the MBA application be? So I run a community for people like you. It was featured last summer in Poets and Quants, and I will be opening the doors to it again in just a couple of weeks. So if you're with me today, you're gonna see an announcement about this. And you are more than welcome to come and continue working towards the MBA application deadlines with a group of equally driven, equally talented candidates from all over the world. Now, with this, I wanted to make sure that we have plenty of time for questions. I promised my friends at Poets and Quants that I'm going to leave at least 15 minutes to questions because I know that you have questions. So here we are, questions time. Put them in the chat, in the Q&A, and I'm going to answer them all. What's on your minds as you listen to all of this? Don't be shy. You're MBA candidates, you're never a shy crowd. Let me actually, let me look through the comments, because I know that I feel like there was one earlier. Let's see, I'm not seeing it now. So what questions do you have about your MBA story, about the MBA application process, and everything that is ahead of you as you continue to work towards the MBA application deadlines? Tell me, what are the golden nuggets that comms are seeking to admit? Ooh, so you're kind of twisting my suggestion. I was talking about the gold nuggets that go into your MBA application, and now you're asking me the golden nuggets that the MBA comms are seeking to admit. Here's how you can think about it, Brandon. So let's talk about how an MBA application gets reviewed, okay? So let me just very quickly, as a former AdCom, walk you through this process. When I was sitting and reading MBA applications, and I can assure you that the process is the same across all schools, like all of us who've worked, especially in leadership roles in admission, we get professionally trained on this evaluation and selection thing, right? There's actually an Institute for New Admissions Professionals run by GMAC on how to do all of this. So as we read an application, the very first thing we look for is academic qualifications. Can the person be academically successful in a rigorous quant environment? The MBA as a degree is very quantitatively rigorous, right? Management as a science, which is the subject that the MBA teaches, can be very quant rigorous. So that's the very minimum. Can you be successful academically? But even more importantly, do you have the work experience, right, that can help you add context, add to the experience of your peers? So that's the second thing. And then, of course, how are you going to fit into the community of that school? How are you going to enrich it? How are you going to leave that place better than you left it? So here's a suggestion I have for you. Very often what I see candidates do when they're starting their MBA application process is they're looking at the admissions criteria, they're looking at the class profile. I have a suggestion for you, and not just the person who asked the question, but all of you. Go and read the mission statement of your dream school. Go and pay a very special attention to exactly how they're talking about who they're looking to educate and bring to the world. That's going to give you a lot of insight into how your dream school is really thinking about who they want to invite to the school. So start even higher than the admissions criteria, right? Because they have very much to do with evaluation, not necessarily with selection. So I hope this helps. All right, let's see. There's a question in the Q&A. Let me open up my windows here. So how do we strike the right balance between highlighting our shortcomings as what we intend to work on during the MBA and your strengths? Love this question. This is an excellent question. Highlight between shortcomings. So here's what I'm going to suggest. First of all, do not think of them as shortcomings. What I like to call what you're talking about is the gap, right? You're pursuing an MBA for a reason. You've been somewhere, you're going somewhere else in your future. Most of the time professionally, you're pursuing an MBA because it fits into your career. And there's something, in order for you to get to from where you are to where you're going, the MBA needs to serve as a bridge, and you need this bridge because there's something in your skill set, in your experiences, in your knowledge that you don't have, or you don't have enough of. So think about the skills or knowledge gap, and there's nothing wrong with having a gap. I'll give you a little bit of an insight. So I'm here in New York now because I'm at my annual conference of international graduate admission consultants, and we're actually meeting with all the top schools. And they talk about that knowledge gap, right? The AdComs talk about what is it that they need to give you in order for you to be successful. So think about it. What is it that you need? It's not a shortcoming. If someone is telling you that you have to already portray a picture of you being perfect, that's absolutely not true. You are going to business school because there's something you need. So what is this something? For some people, I'll give you an example. for a lot of people who come from a technical background, it's business foundational skills. For almost everyone who goes to business school, it's some sort of elevating your leadership skills, right? So think about what is true of you. By the way, the Principles U assessment that I mentioned earlier can give you a little bit of an idea, more than a little bit, about where your leadership development needs are. So approach it not with fear that you're revealing some weakness. The schools expect you to have this knowledge and skills gap that they're going to help fill. I hope this helps. All right, let's see. Is there ever something that would be considered too shallow to include? For instance, I actually feel most alive when I'm doing hair and makeup for myself or others. I love that. I'm worried that including something around beauty may be looked down upon by people who don't understand it. So here's the thing. The key to not have it be shallow is the why. So what makes you feel alive when you're doing it and why? So you're going to, I think that there's actually some beautiful opportunity in what you're describing. You're just going to have to connect the dots and talk maybe about, again, that's just a suggestion. When you do the hair and makeup of someone, what do you help them feel, achieve about themselves, about the way they perceive themselves? So think about the why, okay? Because the why is what's going to elevate it, make it unique, make it interesting, and make it not be shallow, all right? Let's see, what kind of work experience is necessary to stand out in the application? Do I necessarily need to be employed under someone for a few years, or can I still apply with only self-initiated business as work experience? The short answer is you could. What's more important than your actual titles and the companies that you may have worked for is what have you actually accomplished? What have you made possible? What has been your impact? So experiences come in a variety of shapes. Just this morning, I actually heard the business dean of Columbia Business School talk about how entrepreneurship has become so much more powerful and popular as a pursuit among MBA candidates. I happen to know this also as a fact. So you absolutely could have a very unique and a very entrepreneurial path and still be competitive. All right, let's see. You have mainly referenced B schools in the US. Well, I believe it shouldn't change. Is there a different approach or something additional we should be considering for UK or Singapore schools? Frankly, most top MBA programs are looking at the admissions process in a very similar way. Again, you're always advised, just like I mentioned earlier, go and look whatever schools in the UK or in Singapore you're looking at, look at their mission, look at who they tell you they're looking for. You'd be surprised how schools are incredibly explicit about who they're looking for. So nothing that is dramatically different, but pay close attention to how your school talks about who they look for. Strategies on how to strategically communicate about a 2-year gap between undergrad and master. Here's the thing, you're gonna have to tell the story of what happened. Gaps, issues with GPA, low GPA, anything that's going to raise a question needs to be addressed. One of the principles that I always tell candidates to keep in mind is that if you're letting the MBA AdCom guess, chances are they're not gonna guess in your favor, right? So I actually have an entire piece on the optional essay on my website. You can find it. But what I'm going to tell you very briefly right now is be factual, offer some level of reassurance that, like, if the gap happened because there was something unfortunate going on, you want to offer a little bit of a reassurance that it's no longer going to be a problem, that you can be in school, you can handle the program, you can be committed to it. So just explain, no need to make excuses, no need to go on and on and on and on about it. I was just working a week or so ago with a candidate who had like 2 pages of explanations. No need for that. Keep it succinct, just tell them what happened, okay? All right, let's keep going. Coming to the short duration video essays, what is the X factor behind those that we need to clinch? 2 things. Be authentic. Don't have a script. Don't try to read something. There's nothing worse when you're watching a video essay. There's nothing worse than to see the person extremely intently share the screen and kind of read. So just don't be afraid to be yourself. The schools want to know. They're not looking for perfection. They're not looking for polish. So definitely don't go in the direction of like overly produced videos. But also, if you have done your homework, and again, the reason I mentioned that self-assessment and those questions is if you have gotten to the point of what are the most important attributes of your essence as a candidate, you will know what to talk about in your essay. So do your homework. Self-reflection is your best friend in the MBA admission process. So I hope this helps. Have you ever worked with a veteran? How did you bridge the gap of understanding between military and civilian experience? Oh, do I have stories of amazing veterans for you? Here's the thing I'm going to say. It's a super broad question. So if you want to talk more, and this goes to all of you friends, I do fairly generous free consultations. You can find the link to book those on my website. So if you want to speak one-on-one, by all means, please go ahead and do it. Honestly, it's not even a matter of a gap in understanding. What I found sometimes with military candidates is that storytelling doesn't necessarily always come super naturally to you. I think I'm generalizing, obviously. You're trained to communicate in a very specific manner. I worked with a wonderful candidate earlier this year, one of the most satisfying stories of my life, because he was applying to Harvard for the third time, and the previous 2 times he hadn't even gotten an interview, right? And then he was applying for the third time. He was getting up there in age, and he came to me before the deadline, and we worked a little bit on his essay, and he got an interview, he got admitted. And frankly, what it came down to was just crystallizing the messages in his essay. There were a number of pieces where I said, like, okay, why are you telling them this? What do you want the takeaway to be? Oh, well, I want it to be this. Well, that's not what I'm hearing. So tell me the same thing in a different way. So again, I know that this is kind of a general answer, but yes, think about how to translate your experiences into impact and make them use terminology, use measures of impact that a human outside of the service can understand. All right, let's see. We have 3 more minutes. I can't be overtime. Let's quickly run through questions. Advice about your 18-year-old self. Some applications ask about that. You can absolutely go with topics such as self-care, well-being. These are actually mental health nowadays is so important for all of us. Well-being is so important for all of us. You can absolutely go with these topics. They're not too common. I literally yesterday heard an AdCom say, nothing is too common. The why and the how of how you speak about these things make it uniquely yours. So hopefully that helps. Think about the how and the why, not just the what. All right, I want to jump in the chat as well. I was looking at the Q&A until now and see if we can answer a couple of more questions. I was very inspired in college and actually led a student organization called Engineers Without Borders, volunteering every summer. Since I graduated 10 years ago, I've been trying to find that success again in the real world industry. I've been stacking experience and credentials, but I have failed to create that momentum. Hence, the MBA is a catalyst. Is this a seed of a good story? It absolutely could be a seed of a good story. It's your story. I mean, I'm reading it and you know what? I personally can relate to that story because too many years that I care to admit, I was someone with an engineering background who was stuck in her career, and I went to business school and completely pivoted professionally. So it absolutely could be the seed of a good story. All right, I'll take one more question and then I'm going to let you go because I know that you have other sessions to be at. But again, you know where to find me, friends. So let's see. If there's something you struggled with in the past, mental health, depression, eating disorders, anxiety, and now are involved in helping others who experience the same things through support groups, is this the type of thing that you should not mention in your essays or oral story, even if it is a big part of who you are? Here's what I'm going to say. If it's a big part of who you are, what would prevent you from talking about it? The MBA AdCom's job is not to judge you. It's also not to trip you, or catch you doing something wrong. So if this is a big part of your story, and especially if you can talk about how you've taken your own pain, if I may say so, and you've turned it around to helping others, to me, this sounds like a nugget for a really powerful story. So don't self-censor yourself, okay? And if you want to talk more, book time for that. Alrighty, friends, I am going to stop sharing. I'm going to wave goodbye to all of you. Thank you so much for the wonderful questions. I love speaking with candidates. This is what lights me up. And you know where to find me. So I hope to see some of you either in MBA Application Bootcamp or in one-on-one consultations or somewhere at events on the road. But best of luck to all of you. You have been a wonderful audience with really fantastic questions, and asking good questions is always a very good sign in the MBA application process. So onwards and upwards, okay?